The soft light of a new morning spilled into a modest studio apartment, illuminating walls adorned with vivid, eclectic paintings. Each piece told a story, some of struggle, others of joy, but all carried a depth of emotion that could only come from a life filled with experiences both beautiful and painful. This was the world of Elijah Carter, a black artist whose journey had been anything but easy. Elijah had grown up in a small town in Georgia, where opportunities were scarce, and dreams often withered before they had a chance to bloom. From a young age, he had found solace in art. While others played outside, Elijah would sit by his grandmother's old easel, mixing colors and creating images that brought life to the stories she told him. She was his first and greatest supporter, always reminding him, "Your art can change the world, Elijah, but only if you let it." Despite his talent, Elijah's path was riddled with obstacles. In art school, he was often overlooked, his professors favoring students with more conventional styles or privileged backgrounds. The art world, he quickly learned, was as much about connections as it was about talent. Still, Elijah persevered, pouring every ounce of himself into his work. His paintings were a reflection of his identity, bold, unapologetic, and deeply rooted in his culture and experiences. By his late 20s, Elijah had gained a small but loyal following online. His pieces, often inspired by the Black experience in America, resonated with people who saw their own struggles and triumphs mirrored in his work. Yet, in the eyes of the traditional art world, he remained invisible. The gallery owner's prejudice. One rainy afternoon, Elijah found himself standing in front of the towering glass doors of a prestigious gallery in New York City. He clutched a portfolio of his best work, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. This gallery, owned by the infamous Richard Langston, was known for its exclusivity and its penchant for showcasing only the most elite artists. Elijah had heard stories about Langston, a man with an eye for art but a heart hardened by arrogance and prejudice. Langston's gallery was a fortress of high society, where the worth of an artist was often measured by their pedigree rather than their passion. Still, Elijah had hope. He believed his art could speak for itself, breaking through the barriers of bias and tradition. As Elijah stepped inside, the polished marble floors and gleaming white walls seemed to swallow him whole. The gallery was empty, save for a few assistants bustling about and Langston himself, who stood near the back, inspecting a sculpture with a critical eye. Elijah approached, his voice steady, despite the knot in his stomach. "Mr. Langston, my name is Elijah Carter. I'm an artist, and I was hoping you'd take a look at my work." Langston turned slowly, his sharp blue eyes scanning Elijah from head to toe. His tailored suit and perfectly styled hair were a stark contrast to Elijah's simple jeans and paint-splattered shirt. A thin smile played on his lips, but there was no warmth in it. "An artist, you say?" Langston drawled, his tone dripping with skepticism. "I'm afraid we have a very specific standard here, Mr. Carter. But, let's see what you've got." Elijah laid his portfolio on a nearby table and opened it, revealing a collection of vibrant, powerful pieces. Each painting was a testament to his skill and vision, a riot of color and emotion that seemed to leap off the page. Langston barely glanced at the work before dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "Interesting, but not quite what we're looking for. This isn't the kind of art that appeals to our clientele." Elijah felt a flush of anger but kept his composure. "With respect, sir, I think my art could appeal to anyone willing to see it for what it is." Langston chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. "Listen, Mr. Carter, art isn't just about what you put on the canvas. It's about who you are, your connections, your background, your pedigree. Our buyers want names they recognize, not experiments." A quiet determination. Elijah left the gallery that day feeling a mix of humiliation and determination. He had been mocked, his work dismissed without a second thought, but he refused to let Langston's prejudice define his worth. Back in his studio, Elijah channeled his frustration into his art. He painted with a ferocity he had never known, creating pieces that were raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. Each stroke of his brush was a defiance of the barriers that sought to hold him back. Unbeknownst to Langston, Elijah's work was already gaining traction in underground art circles. Wealthy collectors and influencers were beginning to take notice, drawn to the authenticity and power of his creations. The beginning of change. One evening, as Elijah was preparing for a small private showcase organized by a friend, he received an unexpected message. It was from a prominent art critic who had stumbled upon his work online. The critic's words were glowing, praising Elijah's talent and vision. That night, Elijah's showcase was a resounding success. Among the attendees were not only collectors, but also journalists and curators from major museums. By the end of the evening, Elijah had sold several pieces for staggering amounts, and his name was buzzing in the art world. While Elijah's star began to rise, Langston remained oblivious. He continued to dismiss artists like Elijah, clinging to his outdated notions of what made art valuable. But the tides were shifting, and Elijah was about to prove that true talent could not be ignored. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of a bustling art studio in downtown Brooklyn, where Elijah Carter was finalizing a set of his newest paintings. His hands moved confidently across the canvas, blending vibrant colors into scenes that told stories of resilience, love, and identity. Each piece radiated an energy that made it impossible to look away. These paintings weren't just art, they were declarations of who Elijah was and what he stood for. Unbeknownst to Elijah, his name had begun circulating in conversations within the underground art scene. Word of his raw talent and unique perspective was spreading like wildfire. Several of his pieces had already been sold privately for substantial sums, though Elijah preferred to stay out of the spotlight for now. But a part of him knew it was time to break through the barriers of exclusivity that defined the mainstream art world. With that in mind, Elijah decided to take another chance on a gallery, the same one that had dismissed him so harshly before. It wasn't about validation or revenge, it was about proving, both to himself and to the world, that his art belonged in spaces that had historically excluded people like him. The artist's first encounter with the gallery. It was a cold and overcast day when Elijah walked into Richard Langston's gallery once again. The same marble floors and pristine white walls greeted him, but this time, he wasn't the same man who had been mocked and dismissed. Clutching a larger portfolio and carrying himself with quiet confidence, Elijah strode past the assistants who barely glanced up. Richard Langston was in the middle of a conversation with a potential buyer when he spotted Elijah approaching. His brow furrowed as if trying to place the face, but recognition quickly dawned. Langston's lips curled into a thin smirk. Well, Mr. Carter," Langston said, his voice laced with condescension. "Back so soon? I thought I made it clear last time that we have certain standards here." Elijah smiled politely, unfazed by Langston's attitude. "And I thought I'd give you another chance to see my work. Who knows? You might change your mind." Langston sighed, as though entertaining Elijah was a waste of time. "Very well," he said, gesturing for Elijah to lay out his portfolio on a nearby table. As Elijah carefully unveiled his latest pieces, Langston's expression shifted from indifference to mild interest. The paintings before him were unlike anything he had seen before, vivid depictions of urban life infused with surreal elements that seemed to leap off the canvas. One piece, a striking portrayal of a black woman surrounded by abstract shapes that seemed to shield her from a storm, caught Langston's attention. "Interesting," Langston muttered, his tone begrudgingly acknowledging the quality of the work. But then he quickly added, "Still, I'm not sure this is the kind of art our clientele would appreciate. It's a bit bold, don't you think?" Elijah bit back a sharp response, reminding himself of the bigger picture. "Bold is what makes art memorable," he said evenly. "But perhaps bold isn't what your gallery is looking for." Langston chuckled, shaking his head. "You have talent, Mr. Carter, but talent alone doesn't sell paintings. You need a name, a reputation, connections. Art buyers don't spend millions on works by unknowns. The price of the art is revealed." At that moment, one of the gallery assistants walked over, holding her phone. "Mr. Langston, sorry to interrupt, but I think you should see this." Langston frowned but took the phone. His expression froze as he read the article displayed on the screen. It was an art market report highlighting recent sales, and there, prominently featured, was Elijah's name. Elijah Carter's groundbreaking piece, Echoes of the Past, sold for $2.5 million at a private auction, the article stated. The artist, known for his emotionally charged and visually striking works, is quickly becoming a favorite among high-profile collectors. Langston's eyes darted between the phone and Elijah's calm, steady gaze. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Elijah nodded. "Yes. That piece was one of my favorites." "It seems others felt the same." Langston blinked, struggling to process the revelation. "You've sold paintings for millions?" "Yes," Elijah replied simply. "And not just one. Several. I've been fortunate enough to find collectors who see the value in my work, even if your gallery doesn't." The room seemed to grow quieter as Langston grappled with the implications. The man who had mocked Elijah and dismissed his art now stood before him, realizing that he had underestimated not only the artist but the growing demand for his work. Langston's tone shifted, becoming almost desperate. "Well, Mr. Carter, it seems I may have been hasty in my judgment. Perhaps we can discuss a partnership?" "I'm sure we could." Elijah held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not here to make a deal. I just wanted to show you what you missed." Langston's face reddened, and for once, the usually smug gallery owner was at a loss for words. Elijah's quiet triumph. As Elijah left the gallery, portfolio in hand, he felt a sense of vindication. He hadn't needed Langston's approval or validation to succeed, but it felt good to see the man humbled by the truth. Outside, the city bustled around him, but Elijah walked with a renewed sense of purpose. The art world was beginning to take notice of him, and he knew this was only the beginning. Langston, meanwhile, stood in his gallery, staring at the empty space where Elijah's portfolio had been. For the first time, he began to question his own judgment, and his ability to stay relevant in a changing world. While the world of public galleries had largely ignored Elijah Carter, the private art scene had been buzzing with his name. His work, rich with emotional depth and cultural significance, struck a chord with collectors who valued authenticity over superficial trends. It started with a single auction. One of Elijah's earlier pieces, Soul of the City, had been purchased by a well-known collector who shared it at an exclusive event. The painting, with its bold colors and intricate storytelling, became a conversation starter among the elite. From there, word spread rapidly. Private collectors sought Elijah out, and his paintings began commanding extraordinary prices. His inbox was flooded with inquiries, and agents who once brushed him off now clamored for his attention. Yet Elijah remained humble, keeping a low profile and letting his art speak for itself. Meanwhile, Elijah's bank account grew exponentially. Each sale not only validated his talent but also gave him the financial freedom to choose his path. While galleries like Richard Langston's had ignored him, Elijah's success had quietly turned him into a force to be reckoned with. Gallery owners' financial struggles. Richard Langston paced the floor of his gallery, frustration etched into every line on his face. Business had been declining steadily over the past few years. What once was a thriving hub for the elite art world had become a shadow of its former self. The problem wasn't just the economy, it was relevance. Langston had built his gallery on exclusivity, catering to a select group of buyers and showcasing only artists who fit his narrow definition of refined. But times were changing. Younger collectors wanted art that resonated emotionally, art that told stories. Langston, however, had failed to adapt. His recent attempts to bring in new talent had fallen flat. Potential buyers weren't interested in the stale, predictable pieces lining the gallery walls. Worse yet, several of his longtime clients had taken their business elsewhere, lured by galleries that showcased fresher, more diverse works. Langston sat at his desk, going through the gallery's finances. The numbers were grim. If things didn't turn around soon, he would have to start cutting staff, or worse, close the gallery entirely. An unexpected revelation. One evening, as Langston scrolled through social media in search of new trends, he stumbled upon a post from an art influencer. It featured a photo of one of Elijah Carter's paintings, Guardian of the Storm, hanging in the living room of a prominent tech billionaire. The caption read, "Elijah Carter's work is redefining modern art. Bold, emotional, and worth every penny. Proud to have this masterpiece in my collection." Langston's heart sank as he read the post. He clicked through to more articles and posts, each one praising Elijah's meteoric rise. Collectors were raving about his ability to blend contemporary themes with traditional techniques, creating pieces that felt both timeless and urgent. Langston leaned back in his chair, a sinking feeling settling over him. He had been so quick to dismiss Elijah, and now the artist was achieving the kind of success Langston's gallery desperately needed. A growing desperation. Langston couldn't ignore the truth any longer, he needed Elijah Carter. Without a bold move, the gallery's future was bleak. Swallowing his pride, he decided to reach out to Elijah, hoping to broker some kind of partnership. But when Langston called, his assistant informed him that Elijah was unavailable. "Mr. Carter is quite busy these days," she said with a polite but firm tone. "He's currently working on an exclusive exhibition with another gallery." Langston's grip tightened on the phone. "Can you at least tell him I'd like to meet?" "I'm willing to." "Thank you, Mr. Langston," the assistant interrupted. "We'll be in touch if Mr. Carter is interested." The call ended, leaving Langston staring at the receiver in disbelief. For the first time in his career, the power dynamic had shifted, and he wasn't the one holding the cards. The artist's next move. Elijah, on the other hand, was carefully planning his next steps. He had already proven himself in the private art market, but now he wanted to make an impact on a larger scale. His goal wasn't just to succeed but to create opportunities for other underrepresented artists. He began assembling a team to help him launch a groundbreaking initiative, a series of exhibitions featuring diverse talents from around the world. Elijah's vision was clear: to reshape the art world into a space where stories like his could thrive. But there was one decision Elijah hadn't yet made: what to do about Richard Langston's gallery. Part of him wanted to ignore the man entirely, letting him fade into irrelevance. But another part of him saw an opportunity to turn the tables, setting the stage for change. As the art world buzzed with Elijah's name, Langston grew increasingly desperate. He began reaching out to other artists, hoping to find someone who could bring the same level of excitement to his gallery. But no one could match Elijah's star power. Langston's gallery, once a beacon of exclusivity, now seemed outdated and out of touch. And as the days passed, the realization grew clearer: if he wanted to save his gallery, he would have to swallow his pride and face the artist he had so cruelly dismissed. Little did Langston know, Elijah was already planning his return. But this time it wouldn't be as a hopeful artist seeking approval. It would be as a man in control of his destiny, ready to reshape the art world on his terms. The art world was buzzing, and Elijah Carter was at the center of it. Within months, his name had gone from a quiet murmur among collectors to a thunderous roar that echoed through the industry. His paintings, once dismissed as amateur by galleries like Richard Langston's, were now the crown jewels of private collections, museums, and high-profile exhibitions. Elijah's latest collection, Echoes of Resilience, debuted at one of the most prestigious art fairs in the world. The pieces were bold and unapologetic, celebrating his journey and the stories of others who had been marginalized. Collectors and critics alike marveled at his ability to blend raw emotion with masterful technique. The opening night was a spectacle. Attendees included celebrities, art critics, and billionaires, all eager to own a piece of Elijah's brilliance. The event was covered by major media outlets, cementing Elijah's status as not just an artist but a cultural icon. One critic wrote, "Elijah Carter's work transcends the canvas. It is a call to action, a testament to the power of art to challenge, heal, and inspire." Elijah, once overlooked, was now shaping the conversation in the art world. He was no longer just an artist, he was a movement. The artists returned to the gallery. Meanwhile, Richard Langston was watching Elijah's rise with a mix of awe and regret. He had seen the headlines, the record-breaking sales, and the glowing reviews. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to believe that the same man he had dismissed so easily was now reshaping the art world. One morning, as Richard sat in his office, his assistant walked in with an unusual announcement. "Mr. Langston," she said hesitantly, "Elijah Carter is here to see you." Richard froze, his mind racing. Why would Elijah Carter, the man dominating the art world, come back to his gallery? He quickly smoothed his suit and instructed his assistant to bring Elijah in. When Elijah entered the room, he was a striking figure of confidence and poise. He wore a tailored suit, his demeanor calm yet commanding. Richard struggled to reconcile this man with the young artist he had once mocked. "Elijah," Richard began, forcing a smile. "What a surprise. It's an honor to have you here." Elijah raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "An honor, is it? That's not what you said the last time I was here." Richard flushed, his composure faltering. "I'll admit, I made a mistake back then. But I've always respected your talent." Elijah's expression hardened. "Respected my talent? You laughed at me. You dismissed me without even taking the time to look at my work." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Elijah held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not here for an apology, Mr. Langston. I'm here because I want something from you. A proposal that shifts power." Richard's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Something from me?" Elijah nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Your gallery." For a moment, Richard thought he had misheard. "You want to buy my gallery?" "That's right," Elijah said, his tone matter of fact. "I have the resources, the connections, and the vision to turn this place into something meaningful. Something it hasn't been in a long time." Richard stared at him, the weight of the proposal sinking in. His gallery, his legacy, was he really willing to give it up? But as he looked at Elijah, he saw the inevitability of it. The gallery was struggling, and Elijah had the power to save it, or surpass it entirely. "What are you offering?" Richard asked, his voice hesitant. Elijah leaned forward, his confidence palpable. "A fair price. Enough for you to walk away comfortably. But there's one condition: you step down immediately. No strings, no compromises." Richard's pride bristled at the demand, but he knew he had no leverage. Elijah Carter was the future of the art world, and Richard was clinging to the past. The gallery owner's reluctant decision. After a long silence, Richard finally spoke. "You've made your point, Elijah. The gallery is yours." Elijah's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained firm. "Good. But let me be clear, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for the artists who will finally have a place to thrive. A place where talent matters more than pedigree." As Elijah stood to leave, Richard called out, his voice tinged with regret. "Elijah, I know I can't undo the past, but thank you for giving this gallery a future." Elijah paused at the door, turning back with a small, enigmatic smile. "The future isn't yours to thank me for. It belongs to the artists who deserve it. The transformation begins." Within weeks, Elijah had taken full control of the gallery. He wasted no time in transforming it into a space that reflected his vision. The walls, once adorned with predictable, overpriced pieces, now showcased a vibrant array of works from diverse, underrepresented artists. The gallery's first exhibition under Elijah's ownership, titled Reclaimed Narratives, was an overwhelming success. It featured artists from around the world, each bringing their unique stories and perspectives to the forefront. Collectors and critics praised the exhibition, calling it a bold step toward inclusivity in the art world. The gallery, once teetering on the edge of obscurity, was now a beacon of innovation and progress. Elijah, standing at the center of it all, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had turned his pain into purpose, his rejection into revolution. And as he watched the crowds marvel at the art, he knew this was only the beginning. As word of Elijah's acquisition of Langston Gallery spread, Richard Langston found himself at a crossroads. He had been the king of his small corner of the art world for decades, but now, that legacy was overshadowed by his own short-sightedness and prejudice. The gallery he had built from the ground up was thriving, not because of him, but because of the very artist he had ridiculed. One evening, Richard mustered the courage to attend the opening of Reclaimed Narratives. He entered the gallery quietly, almost unnoticed, blending into the crowd of art lovers and collectors. The energy in the room was electric, with people marveling at the diverse and evocative pieces on display. For the first time in years, Richard felt like an outsider in his own former domain. His once familiar world had transformed, and he was no longer the one calling the shots. As he walked through the gallery, he spotted Elijah standing at the center of a lively group. The artist-turned-gallery owner exuded confidence, engaging effortlessly with guests and artists alike. Richard hesitated, then approached cautiously, waiting for a moment to speak. "Elijah," he began, his voice soft and uncertain. Elijah turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Richard. I wanted to congratulate you," Richard said, trying to sound sincere. "This exhibition. It's remarkable. The artist you brought in, the work you're showcasing, it's nothing short of extraordinary." Elijah regarded him for a long moment before responding. "Thank you. Though I doubt you would have thought so a year ago." Richard flinched, the truth of Elijah's words cutting deep. "I deserve that," he admitted. "I made a mistake, a terrible one. I misjudged you, and I regret it more than you know." "An offer rejected." Richard's voice grew more earnest as he continued. "Elijah, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'd like to find a way to make things right. Maybe we could collaborate, work together to elevate this gallery even further. I still have connections, and I believe I could." Elijah held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Richard, let me make one thing clear. This gallery doesn't need your help. What it needed was vision and respect for artists, and that's something you failed to provide when you had the chance." Richard's face fell, but Elijah pressed on. "This isn't about grudges or revenge. It's about building something better, something you weren't willing to do. The artists you ignored, the talent you dismissed, the opportunities you wasted. That's on you. And now, it's my turn to make sure those mistakes aren't repeated." Richard swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "I understand," he said quietly. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." Elijah's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. "I appreciate the apology, Richard. But actions speak louder than words. If you really want to make amends, start supporting the artists you once overlooked. Use your influence to uplift others, not just yourself. The artist becomes a gallery buyer." Elijah's success wasn't confined to Langston Gallery. His reputation as a champion for underrepresented artists made him a sought-after figure in the art world. He began investing in other galleries, purchasing pieces from emerging talents, and ensuring their work received the recognition it deserved. At auctions, Elijah's presence was both respected and feared. Collectors knew that when Elijah Carter wanted a piece, he would outbid anyone to get it. But unlike the wealthy elites who saw art as a status symbol, Elijah viewed it as a means of storytelling, connection, and empowerment. One memorable auction saw Elijah outbid a billionaire for a painting by a young, unknown artist. When asked why he had paid such a high price, Elijah simply replied, "Because their voice deserves to be heard." His action sent shockwaves through the art world, forcing galleries and collectors to rethink their priorities. Elijah wasn't just buying art, he was reshaping the narrative, proving that value wasn't determined by pedigree or popularity but by the power of the work itself. Richard's reflection. For Richard Langston, watching Elijah's meteoric rise was both humbling and inspiring. He began attending exhibitions featuring underrepresented artists, using his connections to promote their work. Slowly but surely, he started to rebuild his reputation, not as the gatekeeper he once was, but as an advocate for change. Though Richard knew he could never undo the past, he took solace in the fact that he was learning from his mistakes. And as he watched Elijah thrive, he couldn't help but feel a grudging admiration for the man who had not only survived his rejection but turned it into fuel for greatness. A new chapter in the art world. Elijah's transformation from struggling artist to influential buyer was more than just a personal victory, it was a seismic shift in the art world. His success challenged outdated norms and inspired a new generation of artists to dream bigger, fight harder, and never settle for less. And while Richard Langston's name would fade into the background, Elijah's legacy was only just beginning. With Langston Gallery thriving under his ownership, Elijah Carter's influence in the art world only grew. He had transformed the once exclusive gallery into a hub for underrepresented talent, providing a platform for voices that had long been silenced or ignored. Elijah's reputation as a patron of the arts reached new heights. He wasn't just buying artwork, he was investing in artists' futures. He established grants, mentorship programs, and residency opportunities, ensuring that emerging creators had the resources to hone their craft and share their stories with the world. Artists from all walks of life flocked to Langston Gallery, not just for the chance to exhibit their work, but because they knew Elijah understood their struggles. He had been in their shoes, dismissed and undervalued, and he was determined to make sure no one else had to endure the same. The gallery's transformation. Under Elijah's leadership, the gallery's exhibitions took on a new life. Each showcase was a celebration of diversity and innovation, featuring pieces that challenged conventions and sparked conversation. One particularly groundbreaking exhibition, titled The New Vanguard, featured works from artists across the globe, many of whom had never been shown in a major gallery before. Critics praised the collection for its boldness and authenticity, and visitors lined up for hours just to catch a glimpse. Elijah made it clear that his mission wasn't just to sell art, it was to create a movement. Art isn't just about beauty or prestige, he said in an interview. It's about connection. It's about telling stories that matter. And every artist deserves the chance to have their voice heard. For Richard Langston, the transformation of his former gallery was bittersweet. He couldn't deny that Elijah had achieved what he never could, creating a space that was both profitable and meaningful. Richard had spent years cultivating relationships with wealthy collectors, believing that their patronage was the key to success. But Elijah had shown him that true success lay in supporting the artists themselves, not just pandering to the elite. Realizing he had much to learn, Richard began attending Elijah's exhibitions regularly. Though he was no longer the center of attention, he found a new sense of purpose in championing the very artists he had once overlooked. A power shift in the art world. Elijah's rise to prominence signaled a major shift in the art world's power dynamics. For decades, galleries and collectors had dictated what was considered valuable, often sidelining artists from marginalized communities. But Elijah's success challenged that status quo, proving that talent and authenticity were more important than status or connections. Other galleries took notice. Many began to emulate Elijah's model, showcasing works from underrepresented artists and prioritizing inclusivity over exclusivity. While some critics accused them of jumping on a trend, the impact was undeniable. The art world was becoming more accessible, more diverse, and more reflective of the world it sought to represent. Elijah didn't see himself as a disruptor, he saw himself as a restorer. The art world lost its way for a while, he said during a keynote speech at an international art conference. It became about who you knew, not what you created. My goal is simple, to bring the focus back to the art and the artists. Richard's new focus. Inspired by Elijah's example, Richard Langston began to rebuild his own legacy. He used his remaining influence to promote underrepresented artists, attending their exhibitions and writing glowing reviews. Though he no longer owned a gallery, his voice carried weight, and he used it to advocate for change. Richard even reached out to some of the artists he had dismissed in the past, offering apologies and assistance. While some accepted his efforts at reconciliation, others chose to move on without him. Richard understood, his actions had consequences, and not everyone was ready to forgive. Still, he found solace in the knowledge that he was trying to do better. And in his own quiet way, he became a part of the movement Elijah had started. The artist leads, and the world follows. Elijah's role as a leader in the art world extended beyond his gallery. He became a sought-after speaker, sharing his insights at conferences and universities. He collaborated with museums, curating exhibitions that highlighted overlooked periods and regions of art history. But Elijah remained humble, always redirecting the spotlight to the artists he supported. "This isn't about me," he often said. "It's about creating a world where every artist has a chance to shine." Under his guidance, Langston Gallery became a symbol of hope and progress, a beacon for artists who dared to dream. And as Elijah's influence grew, so did the ripple effects of his work, reshaping the art world for generations to come. Years after purchasing Langston Gallery and transforming it into a cultural powerhouse, Elijah Carter decided to make one final visit to its original location. He hadn't been there in years. His work as a patron and advocate had kept him traveling the world, meeting artists, and shaping the future of art. The gallery was hosting a retrospective titled From Struggle to Triumph, The Journey of Elijah Carter, a celebration of his life and work. It featured some of his earliest pieces, many of which had been dismissed by critics and gallery owners like Richard Langston in the past. Now, those same pieces were revered as masterpieces, worth millions, and studied in art schools around the globe. As Elijah walked through the exhibition, he paused to admire a painting he had created in his youth. It was raw, unpolished, and deeply personal, a reflection of his struggles and dreams. He thought back to the day he had first brought it to Langston Gallery, full of hope, only to be met with scorn. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "It's beautiful," Richard Langston said, standing beside him. The former gallery owner had aged, but his demeanor was no longer arrogant or dismissive. There was a humility in his tone that Elijah hadn't heard before. "I didn't see it back then," Richard continued. "But now, I understand. I'm sorry for what I said to you, Elijah. And for how I treated you." Elijah studied Richard for a moment, then nodded. "It's in the past," he said. "But I hope you've learned from it." "I have," Richard said earnestly. "Thank you for showing me what true art is, and what it means to be a part of this world. A legacy of change." Elijah's influence extended far beyond Langston Gallery. He had become a symbol of resilience and empowerment, a reminder that talent and hard work could overcome even the most entrenched barriers. Through his foundation, the Carter Initiative, Elijah continued to support artists from marginalized communities, funding scholarships, workshops, and residencies. His mission wasn't just to elevate individual artists, but to transform the art world itself into a space where everyone had a chance to succeed. The art world had changed dramatically since Elijah's rise. Galleries that once prioritized exclusivity and prestige were now embracing diversity and innovation. Museums were re-evaluating their collections, seeking to include voices that had been left out of the narrative for far too long. And at the center of it all was Elijah, a quiet but powerful force driving the change he had always dreamed of. Richard Langston's redemption. Richard Langston, though no longer a gallery owner, found a new purpose in the latter years of his life. He became a vocal advocate for emerging artists, using his connections and platform to amplify their work. He even partnered with the Carter Initiative, helping to organize exhibitions and events that showcased the talents of young creators. Though his earlier arrogance and prejudice had cost him dearly, Richard was determined to make amends in any way he could. At one event, Richard spoke to a crowd of artists and collectors, sharing his journey. "I was blind to greatness because I was too focused on appearances," he admitted. "But Elijah Carter taught me that true art isn't about status or connections, it's about heart, vision, and truth." The artist's legacy lives on. Decades later, Elijah's name became synonymous with artistic revolution. His works were enshrined in museums worldwide, and his influence could be felt in every corner of the art world. But Elijah himself remained grounded. For him, the greatest achievement wasn't the fame or fortune, it was the community he had built. He often visited the artists he had supported, offering advice, encouragement, and friendship. One of those artists, a young painter from a small town, summed up Elijah's impact perfectly during an interview. He didn't just open doors for us, he tore them off their hinges, she said. Because of him, we don't just dream about success. We live it. A final reflection. On the day of his retirement, Elijah stood before a packed crowd at Langston Gallery, now an internationally renowned institution. He looked out at the sea of faces, artists, collectors, critics, and fans, all of whom had been touched by his work in some way. It's not about where you start, Elijah said, his voice steady and warm. It's about where you're willing to go. And no matter how many people try to hold you back, never stop believing in yourself. Because the world needs your story, your voice, your art. As the crowd erupted into applause, Elijah stepped back and took one last look at the gallery he had transformed. It wasn't just a building filled with paintings, it was a testament to resilience, determination, and the power of art to change the world. With a smile, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come.